Welcome back. Today we're going to be doing part 2 of the build process for our British Mark IV tank diorama. If you missed part 1, there's going to be a link to the video in the description below. Make sure to check that out. We're going to start this project by going ahead and painting the treads on the vehicle black. You can see we're going to use a pretty thin paint, that way we can get that to flow into areas we want. The goal is to have it settle more in the lower recessed areas of the track than the ridges, because we are going to highlight those later. The paint we're using for this is just a standard acrylic black by Vallejo, watered down with just tap water. There really isn't a set mixture, just thin it down enough that it flows well, but it's still got enough pigment that it can stain the area that you want it to. You want to go ahead and build up the effect in multiple layers. As you can see, I'm putting down a layer, and then I'll go back over it with another layer just to darken it up until I get it where I want it. This way you can stop as soon as you get to the area you want without having to remove any excess later. In this case, I'm painting the entire track surface black, as historically the tracks on the Mark IV were completely made of steel and riveted together. Now we're going to take a fine tip brush and we're going to use a little bit thicker version of the same paint, a little less watered down black Vallejo, and we're going to go along the edges to make sure that you highlight the sides of the track where they're going to be visible along the side of the vehicle. The only real key to success here is to make sure to take your time. You can mask the area if you really want to. For the most part, as long as you go slow, you should be okay, and you can always go back with the base color for the vehicle and touch up any areas where you maybe make some mistakes. Of course, you're going to want to repeat all these steps on both sides of the vehicle. I'm only filming one side just for time's sake, otherwise the video would be approximately an hour long, and I don't think anybody wants to sit through watching the same thing multiple times. Okay, now we're going to apply the stripe to the side of the vehicle. This is going to be done in just a flat white. It's going to be thinned down just a little bit so that it flows easier and helps reduce brush marks. You're just going to go ahead and mask off the area that you want to apply the paint, and then you're going to go ahead and just apply multiple thin coats till you get the coverage you want. I did forget to film the fact that I had coated the entire area with hairspray for an upcoming chipping step that I will highlight later on in the video as well. The biggest key to success in this area is simply going to be take your time. It's really easy to want to rush this step and apply a thick coat of paint, but you're more likely to end up with mistakes or brush marks as well as potential seepages underneath the edges of the mask. It's better to apply 2 or 3 thin layers that are easier to work with and remove that look better than one thick layer in the long run. I'd like to take a moment to thank our Patreon members, including our newest Patreon member, Ty Nora, as well as Cranky Duck, Noodle, Ford Fitch, and Travis Hilt. Your continued support is what helps us get these videos made, and I couldn't do it without you. The next step we're going to do is going to be adding some highlights to the track raised edges, as well as some of the hard edges on the vehicle. To this, we're going to take a small piece of graphite and we're going to run along the edges of the track and any other hard points that we really want to bring out that metallic shine. Especially in small scale, you can see that graphite, however fragile, does highlight these areas pretty well. It creates a sharp metallic finish without having to apply an additional layer of paint, and the graphite does adhere to the matte surface of the acrylic paint exceedingly well. If you guys are liking this content, I'd like to ask you to go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe, and post a comment, as it does really help out the algorithm down below. When applying your hard edge scratches and metallic shine, make sure to hit all the areas that you think would have a possibility of being worn down naturally through use of the vehicle. Be careful, you can overdo it and make the vehicle look like it's been through absolute hell. I think that just look at it as you're going, and it's easy to find the area that you really think it's got enough. Now we're going to take an extremely fine brush. I'm using a quadruple 0 and just a standard off brown paint. Specifically, I believe this is a Vallejo medium German dark camouflage brown, and we're going to apply some very small scratches to areas that are going to receive a little bit of wear, parts that move, parts that people are going to be climbing in and out of the vehicle, places where just scratches and other dirt buildup may occur naturally on their own. This step can also be overdone if you're not careful. Just apply enough that you think it looks right, and then stop. You can always go back and add more later. It's easier to add more than to remove later. We're also going to go ahead and mark out this stripe where we're going to put a colored center stripe within the white section we painted earlier. We're just using standard blue painter's tape. Make sure that you get the edges pressed down firmly and you'll be able to get a good adherence without being able to have much leakage underneath. Okay, now you're going to use the same technique that you used earlier, applying small thin layers, in this case of a blue paint. This can be pretty much any color. Historically, most of the examples I saw were red. I just wanted to add a little bit of creative liberty on this and my own interpretation, so I went with a blue stripe, especially since the fight in this area of World War I almost exclusively occurred in France on the Western Front, and I thought that this would be a great homage to the French army as well. As you can see, when you remove the painter's tape, you do get nice, crisp, clear lines. I did intentionally create this a little bit off-centered so that it goes more in line with the vehicle's path forward, but that's all just user preference. Now what you're going to do is, taking a stiff bristle brush with just some warm water, you're going to go over the area after the paint is dried and just apply light pressure. This is going to activate the hairspray underneath and remove small chunks of the paint, creating a natural chipping effect. This does work better when you use warm water, in my experience. You can do it with cold water, it just takes a little bit longer and is more prone to larger flakes coming off. Again, this is another one of the steps that you kind of do until you get it where you want it. There isn't really a wrong way to do it or a right way. The amount of chips you want is personal preference, up to you. In this case, we're going to do a little bit more of a torn up area, as this vehicle is in the middle of a trench assault during World War I, and I feel that the paint would probably be fairly damaged. Now we're going to go ahead and black base the diorama. To do this, I'm just using standard black Vallejo acrylic paint. Make sure you go over everything in a nice thick, even layer. The primary goal of this step is to help isolate the diorama scene from the viewer's perspective and help limit immersion breaking, as you do have hard set limits to the edges of the diorama. By putting a black base on everything, you're helping focus the attention on the aspects of the diorama that you want, without having glaring, bright colored edges as the first thing that the viewer's eye naturally is attracted to. Another option that you'll often see is diorama builders will use either a thin veneer or a balsa wood that is trimmed to the actual outline of the base. I chose not to use that on this specific diorama, but I will be covering those skills in an upcoming video as well. It's ultimately dealer's preference on however you choose to do it. In this case, since we're doing a little bit of a simpler, smaller diorama, I did just go ahead and go with a black base. But there is no wrong answer. Whatever you think looks good is the right answer. Now we're going to affix the vehicle to the actual base. What you're going to do is take a mixture of Mod Podge, dirt, and paint, and you're going to apply that to the area where the vehicle will sit. Not only will this help create the illusion of weight, as the vehicle will appear to be pressed down into the ground, once the Mod Podge and dirt sets, it will become extremely hard and affix the vehicle securely to your base. Don't be alarmed if the color of the mixture seems to be a little bit lighter than the color of the ground, as this mixture does tend to darken up with drying. As you can see, the background color on this section is going to be a little bit darker. There is going to be some natural variation to soil as well, and the ground will be disturbed behind a vehicle, especially one this large. As you can see, I'm also stretching out a little bit behind the vehicle to also create the illusion of tracks from where the vehicle has proceeded through before. That helps create a sense of momentum and movement. as opposed to this situation in the scene being more static. Make sure once you have the vehicle set and the glue starts to cure that you don't attempt to move the vehicle at that point, as it can result in potential damage to the diorama base, possibly pulling up some of the ground cover that you've already established. As you can see, we're also going to take some of the dirt while it's still wet and apply that generally over the tracks. This is going to help illustrate that the vehicle isn't just plopped down into this location, but has been moving through the dirt to its current location and still beginning to move forward. We're also going to flick some of the mud up onto the side of the vehicle and apply it to some of the leading edges where dirt would naturally build up as the vehicle is trudging through this nasty, muddy landscape. And after the completion of that step, let's go ahead and take a look at the finished product.